This week, San Francisco Federal Reserve President John Williams wrote a paper in which he introduced a new policy prescription for the ailing U.S. economy. The problem, as he sees it, is slow growth, both economic growth and productivity growth, a condition which he's referring to as the new normal. But what's lost on Williams and his quack colleagues at the Federal Reserve, that this condition is a direct result of the unintended consequences of the Fed's own policy. The problem is all of the economic stimulatives that the Fed has been administering have in fact been sedatives, and they have caused the very condition that the Federal Reserve is now trying to correct with this new policy. But in fact, the policy is not new at all. It's simply more of the same policy that has already failed. The problem is by subsidizing big government, by enabling large deficits, and by misdirecting resources from the real economy to the financial economy, by targeting asset prices such as stocks and real estate, the Federal Reserve is actually starving the real economy of the very resources it needs to grow and produce the type of productivity and economic growth that is now missing and which is now being called the new normal. The Fed's twin prescription to solve this problem basically boils down to two things: higher inflation and larger government deficits. This is like saying, I have got a new weight loss program, and it consists entirely of lying in bed all day and binge eating junk food. Obviously, that program is not going to work, and neither is the Fed's. The Federal Reserve wants more inflation. And what the Fed is saying is because they don't have room to lower interest rates very much because they're already practically zero, the way to lower interest rates is to have more inflation so that we have lower real rates. And Williams is talking about getting rid of the Fed's 2% inflation target. Now, first of all, it didn't begin as a target. It used to be a ceiling. I'm not sure when a ceiling became a target, but now they want to raise the ceiling. How high? Williams didn't say. Is it 2.5%? Is it 3%? Is it 4%? I don't know. But I have a feeling the Fed's inflation ceiling is going to act a lot like the deficit ceiling, meaning every time we approach it, we raise it. But higher inflation is not going to deliver economic growth. In fact, one of the ways that Williams is suggesting the Fed pursue higher inflation is to target nominal GDP growth as opposed to real GDP growth. But who cares about nominal GDP growth? I mean, the whole purpose of deflating nominal GDP growth to get a real number is to take inflation out of the equation. We want to adjust for rising prices. I mean, it doesn't matter if the GDP went up because prices went up. I mean, what good is that? So what we want to do is take that out. We want to take away the fantasy and focus on the reality. But what Williams is saying is we don't need real economic growth. We'll just pretend the economy is growing by focusing on nominal GDP. But what good is pretend economic growth going to do the economy? How is pretending that we have a growing economy going to solve any of these problems that now define the new normal? They're not. The other policy prescription is larger deficits. I mean, first of all, the government is already running annual budget deficits of about $600 billion per year. Isn't that enough stimulus? I mean, if in fact deficit spending stimulated the economy, why isn't $600 billion doing the trick? I mean, how high does it have to be? Again, Williams didn't say. In fact, I believe that the deficits are going to return to about $1 trillion a year naturally, without the government doing anything next year as this economy slips deeper into recession. Remember, we had trillion-dollar deficits early in the Great Recession in the first several years of the Obama administration, and I think the first several years of the next president's administration could likely be the beginning of a much larger economic downturn. Then we certainly can return to trillion-dollar plus deficits without the government doing anything. But Williams wants the government to actually implement an expansionary fiscal policy that would produce even larger deficits, maybe on the order of $1.5 or $2 trillion a year. And of course, how is it going to be possible for the government to finance deficits on that magnitude. The only way they can do it is with the cooperation of the Fed. The Fed would have to monetize all that additional borrowing. The Fed would have to print a bunch of money and buy these bonds to keep interest rates artificially low, which is another way of saying that Williams is advocating QE4. And of course, QE4 is going to have to be bigger than QE1, 2, and 3 combined. If you remember, during QE3, the Fed was buying $85 billion a month in U.S. Treasuries. Well, what's it going to take to finance a $2 trillion deficit? They may have to be buying close to $200 billion per month in government bonds. And unfortunately, I think that is exactly what they're going to be doing. I think, as crazy as this sounds, I think this idea is actually going to be official Fed policy maybe as soon as next year. And you know, the following day, after we got this paper, we got the release of the FOMC minutes. And of course, they continue to keep up the pretense that they're thinking about raising rates, because they're discussing whether we should raise rates now, whether we should wait. But apparently, judging by the reaction in the markets, traders are no longer buying what the Fed is selling. Because even though the Fed was talking about raising rates, the dollar went down and gold went up. So this story is running stale, and people are paying more attention to what the Fed is actually doing rather than what they're pretending they're going to do. All of this, though, is extremely bearish, not only for the U.S. economy, but for the U.S. dollar. And by contrast, it is extremely bullish for gold and silver. What the Fed is about to do will have the effect of basically putting the final nail in the economic coffin of the United States. The Federal Reserve is about to go all in on the failed policies of the past. They have completely misdiagnosed this disease. They are clueless to the extent that their own policies are responsible for the failing health of the patient, and they're about to completely kill the patient with a massive overdose of the same toxic medicine. So my advice to everybody listening to me now is pay attention to what the Fed has just said, pay attention to what they're about to do, and do something about it. And that means getting out of U.S. dollars and getting into gold and silver as quickly as you can. Because if I'm right, and this policy does become official Fed policy next year, the dollar is about to fall through the floor and gold is about to explode through the roof.